All right, how is everybody doing? My name is AK Rex. Welcome to my show. Today I will be co-hosting with Ydnas. So say hello to my co-host. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Yeah, doing great. In a mood to talk a little bit about all of the cool and very underappreciated topics like the dinosaurs and the environment of the Alaska of late Cretaceous, and we got also some Arctic stuff. Hopefully, we get to cover if we have time, and I hope we will. So let's introduce our special guests. They have been here before, but we've got Dr. Jason Bourke. Hello, how are you doing?
Hello, everyone.
And we've got Jeffrey Bond, the curator from the Eccles Dinosaur Park from Utah. How are you doing, Jeffrey?
I'm hanging in there.
Great to hear. Okay, so shall we just literally open up with something really cool? We've got the paper recently that dropped about, in fact, the juvenile, I believe, Dromaeosaurid from
Yeah.
Prince Creek. So, who wants to open that one up first?
Go for it, Jay.
Nobody can decide who goes first. Okay.
Yeah.
Volunteering other people.
What are the other people? But that's only us for now. So let's. Jason, do you want to have a go at that one then?
Well, I'll tell you what. Keep talking for a bit so I can pull up the paper, and then we're
All
good.
right.
I have it open here. I think I have like a millions of tabs open. Yeah. Here it is.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
worries. I mean, what I'm waiting for is when, obviously, when Jason's ready, he can drop some of the screenshots and just comment on them since he's our Paleo
Um,
pro, basically. So he will be giving us all the context. And
but yeah. So this was from Alfio Chiarenza and company, and yeah, it was just the first evidence for juvenile dromaeosaurid from the Arctic of Alaska. So from the Prince Creek Formation.
Yeah.
So most of what we know from the Prince Creek, and we'll talk about it later, is when it comes to these guys, is usually just teeth.
Yeah.
So just little bits of random teeth found here and there. This one's more interesting because you actually get some bones to go with it. If I can get down to the images, they're not the prettiest bones, but we have a piece, all right, a symphysis of the lower jaw. So both sides of the tooth-bearing bones of the dentary that are present there, and then a tooth erupting out of it. And so they were able to base the age roughly at being a young dromaeosaurid. So more evidence of what we'll talk about again in a bit, that these dinosaurs were probably perennial residents, so they always lived in that area, and we're probably not doing a lot of migrating. And it looks like, well, they do have a phylogenetic analysis in here to figure out roughly where it is, and dromaeosaur is probably the best thing you could say for it because they have like a large polytomy just showing velociraptor and
I've heard it.
they're all popping out together.
Yeah. Yeah, I've
Right.
seen them.
I'm
I've
gonna
seen them.
magnify the. Sorry, I'm just gonna magnify the
Yeah.
image. So you keep talking, guys. I'm just gonna zoom in the images so they
Yeah.
get displayed.
Okay.
All right. Sorry.
So would then a Sauropod dinosaur fall underneath a dromaeosaurid, or how does that work in terms of the phylogenetics?
How is it in relationship to Sornitholestes?
Oh, just like in here it says the paleo ecological and paleo biogeographical implications of a juvenile Arctic Sauropod or Sauropod. Oh man, words.
Sauropod.
Yeah, Lesticinae. Yeah, yeah. So, like, my question is, how does that relate to it also being a dromaeosaurid? Like, where does that fall?
Ornitholestes are a subset of dromaeosaurs. They're
Okay.
Sauropod, if I recall correctly, was one of those taxa that Greg Paul lumped into Velociraptor along with Deinonychus back in the late 80s.
Of course, it's correct, Paul.
It's one of those ones that's got some similarities to Velociraptor. So we're not talking about like Dromaeosaurus itself being in Alaska, but something that might have more, say, Asian affinities.
Oh, okay, right.
Yes, that is the other important aspect of this. The presence of the big implication of this is that finding this dromaeosaurid and its relationship to, I guess, more Asian dromaeosaurids is that there was still that land bridge connecting Asia to North America. Beringia.
That's a really interesting sort of a point, because kind of it's not like a contradiction, but more like a paradox. Like Beringia was a land bridge at that time, as well as in other time periods, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
At the same time, we have evidence that this particular individual was there perennially, and this is supporting a body of evidence that a lot of species are there perennially. So that's kind of an interesting sort of an illusion, probably due to some of the imperfections of being able to date that far back. You can't get the resolution. Shows that, oh yeah, for 100 years at one point had animals going back and forth across Beringia, and then for another 1,000 years after that, they decided to stay put. And you just can't do that with geologic time, but that seems to be the pattern. You'd have animals going back and forth between Asia and North America for a little while, and then some of them just like Beringia and stayed put. And
yeah,
it wasn't a migratory sort of a thing, we can say that much.
Yeah, that seems to make sense. Seems to really line up with what we do have for certain species living on both North America and Asia.
Like a lot of evidence of that for, gosh, I want to say millennia, but it was even longer than that. It was like whatever the of years, like going back to the time of Tenontosaurus and Deinonychus. Eolambia down here in Utah was an Asian invader. Then you had like Hadrosaurs developing apparently in North America, and then going back over into Asia. And so there's a lot of back and forth between the two continents during much of the latter part of the Cretaceous. Whereas at the beginning of the Cretaceous, you have stuff going between North America and Europe. Then that stops, and then it's Asia and North America that end up kind of the immigration hotspots.
Yeah.
All right, so Jason, would you like to comment on what you just posted in the chat and that little remark as well in a bit more
sure,
detail?
Yeah. I just posted figure 5 from the Chirenza paper on that new dromaeosaurid, just showing that bit that they highlight in red there, because that's showing the polytomy. So what looks like a comb is just basically showing that, according to their phylogenetic analysis, all of those different animals, so Achilobator, Deinonychus, Tianuraptor, Velociraptor, this new unnamed specimen, and then the other guys down below it, which gets a little more confusing. They're basically all equally related to each other, which in terms of the phylogenetic analysis just means that the data that they put in is not enough to properly separate all those different groups. So according to that model, everything is roughly equally related, because it can't really tell who's supposed to be more closely related to whom.
Right.
And does that mean that the idea, where you have Dromaeosaurinae and you've got Velociraptorinae, those are not really considered for this study, or they still apply, but we're talking about overall as the family members of Dromaeosauridae? How does that fit in? Since my Dromaeosaurids, unfortunately, are, well, my Maniraptorans in general, a little rusty, so I want to make sure.
Yeah, same here.
It looks so. It's a So this is their strict consensus topology. So it's basically showing only the relationships that were routinely recovered from all the different trees that the program made, and in any instance where the animals or in any instance where the taxa do not recover a specific relationship and it just jumps around a lot, it's just going to show that polytomy. It's basically just going to say we can't resolve this area right here. In fact, whenever you see a polytomy in any phylogenetic analysis, you pretty much can assume that that means that the program was unable to resolve those relationships. So that area is in flux. It's all based on data that they pulled from Lee et al., which was a 2014 paper. And that was the one where they were looking at, that paper was called Sustained Miniaturization and Anatomical Innovation in the Dinosaurian Ancestry of Birds. So it was very Maniraptoran focused. So it's probably a good tree to pull the original data from, but it looks like in this instance, I don't remember what the analysis pulled for that paper, but in this instance, it's not able to really pull the exact position out. And I should say there are a couple of more trees that they show down below. Let me see.
While you're looking that up, that's a really interesting polytomy. I mean, you have Velociraptor and Deinonychus, which have a lot of similarities, but then you got like a Euraptor and a Chilibator, which are very different from each other and from those other two. So that's another thing to kind of from this polytomy, is that you get a collection of animals that are that different in a polytomy that you really can't tell what this thing is coming from, which makes sense. I mean, what we've got of this particular specimen is just the maxilla, right?
The dentary in this case, but yeah, you're right. It's they basically just have two small pieces of one bone, two different bones, but yeah, just two small pieces to work with. So that limits the amount of characters you can actually put in there.
Just unfortunate. The same thing with Nanosaurus from Prince Creek. You don't get much of that. And it kind of sucks, if I'm being honest.
The funny thing about it is unfortunate, but it's also not unusual. I mean, there are a lot of times when you get just scraps, especially if you're working off of, like, there are going to be different kinds of quirks, and some formations are going to give you just this wealth of skeletal material. Like the Cedar Mountain Formation, we get, all sorts of cool stuff out of there, and we're not even able to describe it yet. But then, like, say you get something like the North Horn Formation, and it's just bits and pieces, or like the Kem Formation, just bits and pieces. right? Like, you know the pain.
Yeah.
Kem, and you know the pain.
Oh, man.
It's like imagine trying to, when you build your first ever large Lego set for the first time ever, and multiply the difficulty by 100 when trying to put all that together.
And just take away some pieces from the set as well.
Yeah, and try to
take away like
from
over
the
half
head,
pieces.
Yeah. Is there a reason why that why the preservation bias is so insane in Prince Creek, where we just get so little material from theropods?
There is, and that actually makes for a good segue for the majority of the talk. So I say we do that. So let's take a look here.
Yeah, I agree. Let's go for it.
So again, we'll get a couple of kind of basic information out, right? So we're talking about the Prince Creek Formation, which is in the north slope of Alaska, which is also kind of not a catch-all term, but it is very much an umbrella term for a lot of different regions in Alaska, where there collecting various specimens. Alaska's current latitude is about 64 degrees north, so it's within the Arctic Circle. Late Cretaceous Alaska, which is where we're going to be pulling most of the specimens we talk about, it was about 71 degrees north back then. So Late Cretaceous Alaska was much further north than current Alaska. And see if
That's interesting.
So I'm going to drop this in the chat. So this is from Anthony Fiorillo's book in 2018, which is on Alaskan dinosaurs.
He has done more work on Alaskan dinosaurs, hasn't he?
Yeah, the Alaskan dinosaurs are his jam. Like,
Yeah,
he's
I've
up in that
noticed.
region.
Yeah, I've
And,
seen his name in so many papers on Printz Creek and Alaskan dinosaurs.
Yeah, I think he's major curator up there, and so he leads most of the digs. So
Right.
This is from his paper, and this just, let me write it in here. This just shows movements of Alaska throughout the late Mesozoic.
And which museum
There we go.
is he mainly the one where he curates? What's the museum that he's assigned to?
Ask me a hard one, why don't you? Okay.
Well, that's kind of what AKRX channel does. We ask difficult questions.
Yeah.
Let's actually, you know what we'll do? We'll magnify this image if we can.
I'm going to also write in here that the red dot represents the North Pole.
Right, okay.
So as you can see in the top left, it starts at about 140 million years ago. So right mid-late Cretaceous. Then we go, or early Cretaceous, and then we go 100 million years ago. And then 70 million years ago, and then current. And then that dark gray is Alaska. You also notice Alaska gets bigger as we get closer to the present. And the reason for that can be seen here. Let's see. That's North America. All right, so this is what we'd be looking at in the late Cretaceous in North America. Basically,
how many years ago?
We'll be looking around 100 million to the end of the Cretaceous.
Okay.
I mean, things do start drying up towards the end of the Cretaceous, but
Yeah, that's why I was a bit confused.
Yes, but in this case, for the most of the late Cretaceous, for most of the Cretaceous period, North America was two separate continents. Right,
Yeah.
we had Appalachia on one side, which is the forgotten continent because it gets hard to pull material from there. And then there's Laramidia, which is the one that gets heavily sampled. And for comparison, here is another view of the same thing, except this one has more of modern day United States under it, so you can get an idea roughly what we're looking at. Note how much of what would have been Alaska is actually underwater, right? So there's a lot of Alaska missing throughout much of the Cretaceous.
So we see more Alaska as the western interior seaway dries up.
Yes.
Okay.
And western interior seaway has been around even at the time of the extinction, and was it still around past the extinction of the Cretaceous, or was it already dried up?
That one I have to look up. When did the western interior seaway dry up?
I don't think it was completely dried up at the end of the Maastrichtian. I think it was drying up, but I don't think it was completely dried up. From what I can remember. If I do remember correctly.
Yeah, I remember part of the end of dinosaurs had to do with the drying up of the seaway. So I'm pretty certain it doesn't make it throughout the end of the Cretaceous. But there was bits of it still. Okay,
yeah.
So yeah, there's still bits of it in the early Paleocene. So it just I'm thinking it wasn't quite as complete.
I had a map somewhere of it, but I just don't know where I left.
Cool.
Yeah, so it starts around the mid to late Cretaceous. So you get this inland flooding of the continent. And then by about the early Paleocene, probably somewhere within the Paleocene, that's when it all finally completely dries up. And we have more of the continent that we're used to seeing.
So if I'm understanding correctly, also, it's a slight tangent, but does that basically mean that most of the fossils like Tyrannosaurus rex, for example, they're restricted more towards the Laramedian side of the United States, right? Or
Correct.
is it correct, right? Because technically, if you look at it this way, you find them in the states, which are on the more so-called left side of the map, if I'm correct, provided that I understand the geography of the United States correctly.
Yeah. So on the left side, correct, on the left side of the map, that's a large strip of land called Laramidia, is where you find all the Tyrannosaurus rex fossils, which does kind of show, even though T-Rex was a very widespread taxon, as was Triceratops, they were widespread like latitudinally, but they couldn't cross too much of the continent because so much of it was underwater. But we do know that early Tyrannosaurs were at least on Appalachia. So
wasn't
crossover.
Dryptosaurus, was it? Or well, I'm thinking of Appalachiosaurus.
Appalachiosaurus, yeah. So an early like Albertosaurine style Tyrannosaurid. Or Tyrannosaurid.
Right.
Yeah, Tyrannosaurid. Yes.
Tyrannosaurus and Appalachiosaurus both were tyrannosauroids, and don't have a lot of resolution for that because we get so little from Appalachia. But I do recall, and this map that Ydnas just put up, there has been ceratopsian material, just a tooth. But it was found in Appalachia, so a lot of what we're saying is very much time dependent. And it is possible that taxa like Tyrannosaurus rex and Triceratops were making inroads into Appalachia towards the very end of the Cretaceous. We have no data to say exactly how that was happening or how that was affecting populations. Or it's a complete black hole.
Yeah, exactly. This is what I was. I'm sorry. This is what I was referring to earlier when I remembered something about the Western Tertiary drying up towards the end, but not completely, because I did remember reading this paper on a tooth being found on Appalachia. It belonged to a ceratopsid. Which ceratopsid? We don't know yet. Last I checked, but it could be from Triceratops, but we don't know.
And I think it's some kind of Chasmosaurine, and if we're talking late Cretaceous,
it's most likely Chasmosaurine. Yeah, I don't think any Centrosaurines survived into the Maastrichtian except for Peki Rhinosaurus Protorum. Even then, that one didn't even survive till the very end and lived only in Printz Creek.
Yeah, it's interesting the dispersal pattern that they're showing on that bottom picture. I think would be funny is, I mean, this is not at all like scientific. It's just having fun with it. But it looks like they're crossing on the southern United States, southern North America, so like through the Mexico region at a very enlarged Gulf of Mexico area. So if they were crossing at the very end of the Cretaceous, I could just imagine one bad day at the very end of the Cretaceous where all of a sudden that entire population gets wiped out.
It would have been a bad time to cross into Appalachia.
It's like time to bathe, guys. Come on, let's play, and then everybody just drowns.
maybe that's the reason why we don't find that many dinosaurs over there. They all got vaporized.
Regarding Anthony Fiorillo's position, this I could actually pass this on to Jeffrey. According to his Wikipedia page, he is the chief curator at the Perot Museum. I was expecting a little further north.
Perot Museum, or where is that?
That should be in Salt Lake.
Oh, okay.
That's they unfortunately are one of the museums that also took a major hit from our current pandemic, and so a lot of people got fired.
Oh, really? Phew, didn't know that.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
not
They
a
no.
were
good
happening
time
all over the
for
place,
anybody.
and yeah, they were no exception, unfortunately.
I'll
Do you
look
know
that up.
how other museums are doing, such as the Royal Tyrrell Museum in Black Hills Institute? Do you know how they are doing?
I know Black Hills recently posted on their Twitter page that they have been going out and prospecting.
Okay.
So I'm not sure how much they've been hit, especially since they're less a museum, or at least they're able to offset their costs through the selling of fossils. So that can help at a time when if people can't come in to see your stuff, they can still buy your stuff, and they can still be making, though probably to a lesser degree, exhibit pieces.
Mm-hmm.
But
It's
yeah,
like,
I'm not sure about the Tyrrell. That's a good question. I haven't heard much about
It's
the
like-
Canadian museums.
Yeah.
Looks like the Perot Museum is in Dallas.
Yeah, it's in Dallas. Yeah, I was just about to
Oh,
say
was that
that.
in
I
Dallas?
think it was Texas.
Whoop, my mistake. Sorry. Yeah, that was more SVPs ago than I remember. Yep. It's an interesting museum, very modern art style. It just looks like a block on the outside. Then you go in and it's all really well designed.
I remember at seeing the article for that and how they had the layoffs and everything. So, higher times.
Indeed. All right. So anyway, that was
Yeah,
just
let's
kind of
continue, with-
getting us in the zone, right? So we're looking at Lake Cretaceous, Alaska. It's not as big as modern day Alaska. It's further north than modern day Alaska,
Mm-hmm.
just because of the way the tectonics moved. What else?
Yet
we have
it's still
here?
warmer than it is today.
Yet it is still warmer. Yes. There
Yeah.
is another area that I would like to mention. It's a little younger. Nope. Try it again. It's a little older, so it's more mid-late Cretaceous. So.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Axel Heiberg Island in Canada, where there's also been a lot of good fossils discovered from that sort of mid-late Cretaceous time period. That had a paleo latitude that was also about 71 degrees north, so roughly in line with Alaska at the time. Now it's like 79 degrees, so actually that one moved further north, whereas Alaska moved further south.
I'm sorry, which formation was this?
The formation, I don't remember the name of it. It's mostly outcrops that are from this island called Axel Heiberg.
Okay.
If I can pick up pictures of it. And it is a Canadian island. Images of it. It looks very barren, which is perhaps not surprising. If my computer can load, if my internet connection can load things fast enough.
Also, I wanted to take the opportunity and comment on the fact that it has been mentioned already, and this is something I would like to look into as well, about the misconception of the climate and the at the time in both Prince Creek and even Antarctica, because of how mistakenly it gets misunderstood that it's a cold tundra or whatever, but it's not really. And,
I do have a paper up about that specifically. It's hang on, let me see. I'll post it in the
just drop
chat.
it in the chat, and then later when I upload the video on the channel, I can use the link as well in the description.
So this quote here says, whereas some freezing may have occurred, the lack of evidence for cryogenetically modified soils indicates that this region did not experience prolonged freezing typical of modern Arctic environments during the Cretaceous, referring to Prince Creek. So yeah, there may have been some freezing, but it wasn't really prolonged as we see today.
Nice.
The other thing that's very interesting about the paper that I have noted, the one that we have first brought up about this Juvidromiosaurid, is that they seem to imply, at least suggest in this paper, that there was no actual, full-on migrations being done from the area. It was mostly the taxa, the populations of herbivores were mostly restricted to the area, which subsequently means that the carnivores from that area would also be not that far behind, as the rule generally dictates.
I wouldn't have a reason to migrate. I did remember reading a paper on that a while back. Not this paper specifically, but it's nice seeing that another paper supports the idea that the animals in Printz Creek were just all year round residents. But a while back, I read a paper on the Edmontosaurus, which was back then known as Ugrunanuk, would stay within that place. Yeah.
It's not an easy one to get out.
No, it's not. Like, I've practiced that a lot. I hate that name. I prefer Edmontosaurus. Thank you.
Yeah, I prefer Edmontosaurus.
The real reason why they sunk the genus.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, is there any particular species assigned to that Edmontosaurus? Or
yeah,
is
it's Regalis. Regalis, last I checked.
okay, so it's Regalis as the Canadian species, basically, yeah.
Yeah, last I checked. I could be wrong, but I think it is Regalis. As an actance is a more
It's a
late
later one, yeah.
Maastrichtian. Yeah. I think
Yeah,
I'll.
I think it was.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'll see if I can find the paper for Hadrosaurs being just all year round residents.
Yeah, and I have a couple of references to help with it. A couple of extra things just to add in here, just to finish our kind of preliminary on it.
Sure.
We're talking late Cretaceous dinosaurs for the most part, but Alaska does have strata that covers pretty much all the Mesozoic. So it does have Triassic strata, though I don't think there's been any dinosaurs pulled from there yet. They also have the upper/late Jurassic Naknek Formation, which is definitely the most widespread formation in their state, but is also very fossil poor. So not a lot of dinosaurs are from that. Early Cretaceous dinosaurs are also present. So the two major formations we'll be talking about are the Nanoshook Formation, which is a little earlier, earlier Cretaceous, but still late Cretaceous, so it's like early late Cretaceous, and that's actually would have been when Alaska was even further north, about 85 degrees paleo latitude, and then there's that late Cretaceous Printz Creek Formation that we're all very well aware of. But the Nanoshook and the Printz Creek are both members of, or are both formations that you'll find in the North Slope of Alaska. So that's usually the two areas. There is another outcrop that's become very important over the past couple of years, and that's coming from Denali National Park. So we have like North Slope and we have Denali.
Okay.
And I got some something that I've just remembered as well. You know how Printz Creek, of course, that predates generally the likes of Hell Creek and Lance, Frenchman, Scollard, etc., Javelina. Am I correct about that?
Yeah.
Does it predate it, or does it
It is older. I think the youngest date for Printz Creek is 69 million years ago.
Right. And,
so it is older than Hell Creek and the Lance Formation.
Yes.
In this case, if that's the case, what do we know what happened after that time period? Basically, stratigraphically, do we have any evidence of the taxa living, at the same time prior to extinction, like alongside with Hell Creek and etc., or do we not have anything from that particular area of Alaska from the extinction?
That's a good question. All I know
Printz
about
Creek
that.
Formation.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Mike.
Just in terms of time spans crossed, I had to find my information. So the Nanoshook covers. Let me think. It's Albion to Cenomanian, so that large chunk of the beginning. So kind of like the end of the early Cretaceous, beginning of the late Cretaceous, and then the Printz Creek Formation goes from the Campanian through the Maastrichtian, so end of the late Cretaceous, and then into parts of the Paleocene. So it actually crosses that boundary. And actually, now that it's in my head, let me drop this one from Anthony Fiorillo's book as well, which will really help out. This shows the list of outcrops found in Alaska, where they are, and what their time period is that they cross.
All right, yeah, so we have the Printz Creek that goes from the roughly middle of Campanian or so, it looks like in the diagram, and then it goes even... Well, it goes kind of all the way to the middle of the Paleocene, does it not?
Yeah, no, it runs a pretty long way. You can see, and which is also pretty common for this. The closer you get towards modern time, the more you have. So the Prince Creek actually gets a little bit larger as you get closer towards modern day.
Yeah. But the interesting part that I'm most kind of puzzled with is what once we see, because obviously all the Prince Creek taxa, like Peki Rhinosaurus, for example, and we've got other ones as well, they are known to still predate everything that has showed up in the Hell Creek. So this means that, well, naturally I would have a question: what happened to dinosaurs in that area after the after this taxa? Like, what have they persisted till then, or has there been anything else, or do we just not know what was going on at that time?
I know that Peki Rhinosaurus just disappears
It just
completely
disappears
after
over the
that.
radar and that's it.
But I don't really know what happened to Naluk/Edmontosaurus regalis. May have just
anagenesis into
I was gonna say, but I'm not sure if we have evidence for that. I've questioned that, but I'm not sure if there's any evidence supporting an anagenetic evolution to anectids.
And I'm not sure. Well, they'd be a good specimen to test it, but I don't know if anyone's tried to yet.
Yeah, there might be something on it.
And then worth mentioning is, even though the Prince Creek Formation, as you can see in that image, crosses all the way through the Paleocene, the dinosaur-bearing fossils stop at the Maastrichtian. Like, they don't go beyond there. So there's still the disappearance. Exactly how well polar dinosaurs handled the end Cretaceous extinction, I believe that's very much up in the air. It's an area we're still studying to see how well polar dinosaurs took it, because they were definitely as far away from the initial impact as you can almost get.
Yeah. Do you have what materials do you have of dinosaurs from the late Maastrichtian in Prince Creek? Do you have any at all?
We should. That is a list for where am I looking for it? Let's see. That would require looking up the specific. Most of these guys are Maastrichtian dinosaurs that you get in the Prince Creek.
Yeah, but are there any late, like exactly 66?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
That's what I was wondering as well, because it seems like there is no picture yet of that sort of time frame stratigraphically, because in terms of 68 to 66, you can even find some fossils that presumably date that far, even in places like Russia, Romania, Madagascar. I think even in Argentina we have a few that might potentially go as far as that in terms of the stratigraphic equivalence and age.
I have a better question then. Do we have any evidence that would suggest that the dinosaurs we know lived in Prince Creek didn't live all the way till the end of the Maastricht?
No evidence to show that they died beforehand.
Okay.
Other than, like, if there are Campanian species, making it through to the Maastrichtian might be a bit tough. But if you're in the Maastrichtian, it's very possible that you made it all the way to the very end.
All right, that's interesting. So you may have a centrosaurine that survived to the very end, which I find interesting.
That would be interesting to see if there's like a Lazarus taxon kind of a deal where they're just, not even Lazarus, just kind of like remote areas where taxa that normally died off continued going.
Yeah.
How everything in Australia is.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if we find a lot of that sort of thing on the western end of Laramidia. We had that mountain range of going up and down the middle. What little evidence we get from the western side shows some really interesting stuff going on, like the Pro-Saurolophus line. Get Saurolophus and goes up into Asia and good stuff in eastern Laramidia, and then you've got Augustinolophus, which is basically Saurolophus, but its crest is like really funky. So I'd have to review, though, what's going on with Peki Rhinosaurus and its movements from Canada up into Alaska and back and forth during time. It seems like we've got a scenario for that.
Yeah, it seems like they went more north as time went on, because like got Lacusta in Dinosaur, or around Dinosaur Park, I think, Wapiti Formation. And then you got Canadensis going up in Alberta, then finally Protorum in Alaska, and they slowly go up.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like, Pachyrhinosaurus is a centrosaurine, but it's a really weird centrosaurine in some ways. It's kind of reminds me a little bit of bovids. You know, you got a lot of bovids that will fight with their horns, but then you look at bison
and buffalo and muskox.
Right. The evolutionary trend there is that they're getting smaller and smaller horns because they like butting with their heads a lot more. Right. And so they're doing more the ram sort of a thing, and it'd be interesting to see where that evolutionary scenario would
really
go.
Interesting, because like while other ceratopsians they just use their horns for this thing, for these kinds of things, Pachyrhinosaurus just used these big nasal bars, and it seemed to work for a very long time, which I find very interesting. Yeah.
There's something else that's very interesting, and if you compare the skulls of Pachyrhinosaurus lacustae, then Pachyrhinosaurus canadensis and the Protorum, notice that canadensis being the type species and the first one discovered, you kind of see it, okay, so it's got a big bump on its nose, pretty massive. You probably could knock there and it would not feel a thing, I would imagine. And then you have lacustae, which actually is the earlier, which predates it, and it's got a smaller bump overall. If you notice, the bump itself is actually a little bit smaller.
I'm posting a chart in the chat.
There we go. And then you look at the Paratarum, which in relationship, in comparison, has an even bigger bump altogether, and that's what makes it very interesting. That it seems that the trend was going in favoring of less pointy or hooky, horn things, so it's not about jousting and locking and seeing who's gonna push the other or whatever, who basically chickens out first, but it's more about probably a different, potentially even more violent, you could argue, with this whole ram piece. And then we've got, nice set of pictures there, so let me just open up another diagram here.
I'll try and get the paper.
Yeah,
gotta wonder if that convergence is being driven by congruent action forces. I know that bovids and ceratopsians, very, very different animals in lots and lots of ways, but in convergence between mammals and dinosaurs before, that gets really weird, and it's just like one thing. I don't think it's a coincidence that we're seeing this in Pachyrhinosaurus, and it's like one of the last surviving centrosaurine. Ought to be something to that.
I think it's really interesting. Like, why did this work for them? Why did they just go this different route? Just use blunt force trauma instead of the goring like other.
I have some ideas to answer that, and of course, they don't come from the perspective of I don't really have any zoological experience, but I do study weapons quite a lot, and how they affect, force multiplication, and how the certain things, get done when you apply that force multiplier, because that's what a weapon is. And that battering ram, first of all, serves a very interesting purpose. For one, it adds armor, natural protection to the very vital areas of the skull already, so that makes it practically invulnerable for potential predators.
On the paper, by the way.
And then we have another interesting thing to note is that with the pointy horns, first of all, it gives you less armor, and then secondly, it also implies that with a point, you need it requires you to have a more accurate direction of where the point goes, whether it's defensive. So it means that being in the defensive, you have to be a bit more active in defense, while at the same time you have to be active in counterattacks and repellent techniques when your predator, whatever it is at the time and the place, tries to have a go at you. And predators tend to be quite determined, especially if they are very hungry and big. Then you also have this thing with the Peki Rhinosaurus, that this armor function of the boss becomes more passive now, so it does not have to actively seek defense. All it has to do is just not let itself to get bit in the neck, and not let itself get bit in the legs or shoulders, where they can potentially bleed out. And all it has to do is use its blunt force, which means that the boss not only means that it does not necessarily have to directly connect, with the impact of a potential attacker if it's a predator, but also if it pushes its head sideways, by whatever angle that it gets the potential attacker at, all this mass that this boss adds up to it is going to be transferred into that point of impact regardless. Yeah. And that's why certain, things like this are more effective, in my opinion at least, than the pointy horns like we see in Centrosaurus or Styracosaurus and etc. Styracosaurus, of course, it has the side ones that are poking out, so that's potentially also a passive way maybe of defense. But again, I digress at this point. But you get the point why probably with the ram it requires you to kind of worry a lot less about certain things. And but that's just me trying to make sense of it. There is no actual, as far as I know, there's no evidence to support what I'm saying. It's just my opinion based on my understanding of weapons and practicality.
There's going to be that practical aspect to it. Sorry. There's going to be that practical aspect to it. There's another correlation, and then we can move on. But look at the difference between Centrosaurians and Chasmosaurians, and not only is the weaponry and the display function of that head different, but also the feeding mechanics are different.
Yeah, that is true.
Centrosaurians tend to have that much deeper sort of face to it, whereas Chasmosaurians are, for lack of a better word, a little bit more beaky. And what's really interesting to me is that since the Centrosaurians mostly die off and they're replaced by the Chasmosaurians, some Chasmosaurians, like the Triceratopsines, that tribe is to be evolving towards a less Chasmosaurian lifestyle and a more Centrosaurian lifestyle. Yeah. That's one reason why, for the longest time, Triceratops, nobody could figure out whether it was a Centrosaurian or a Chasmosaurian, because it was such a weirdo either way. So we've got Regaloceratops and a couple of other missing transitional taxa. We can see that there was an evolutionary trend going on there, and it makes you wonder if there's not an ecological role, like did ceratopsians in Laramidia have to be territorial and basically claim territory where the plants would be? Is that one reason why they seem to have all this intraspecific fighting going on? Is there something to do with that lifestyle? And that makes it interesting, because then that can help you kind of figure out, in concert with other lines of evidence, what was going on with the climate at that time. And that could very much play a role, and vice versa, in figuring out what the climate of Alaska was like at the latest Cretaceous, and how that was affecting the animals that lived there.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a very good point. Yeah.
I think it is important to keep.
Jason.
Sorry, I just agree with Jeffrey. Like, it's important that what Centrosaurians were doing was different from what Chasmosaurians were doing.
Yeah.
And that looks like maybe Peki Rhinosaurus just got a little bit more physical than previous centrosaurians did.
Yeah, this does remind me. I was reading a paper a while back on the beak structure and the jaw structure of Ceratopsians, and it showed that Peki Rhinosaurus had like probably the strongest bite force of all the Ceratopsians they know of, or like it could withstand the highest force as well. I'll see if I can find the paper, but that's really interesting.
There's a lot going on with that. The funny thing is that we still don't know exactly what ceratopsians were eating. That's still a mystery. So figure that out, and whatever study makes a good argument for that, and if it's a great argument, even better, you're going to see a whole lot of dominoes just kind of start to fall into place.
Yeah. But it's really interesting when I saw the difference in the bite force and how much force the jaws of Peki Rhinosaurus could withstand, it really made me just wonder, like, why? Why did it have such strong jaws, and why could it withstand such force? Like, were there tougher plants in Printz Creek or down in Dinosaur Park Formation in Canada? Because those a really noticeable difference.
There is, there might be a correlation down there, less with tougher plants as so much as tougher plant parts. So eating less nutritious things like bark and more, what's the word? Yeah, just tougher parts of the plant, which you might do if there's not a lot of plants to go around in the first place.
So they may have done that in Printz Creek when times got a bit tough.
Okay, so continuing us forward here, I guess we should mention.
I'm happy to carry on if everybody's happy as well.
Yeah. Like, I'm sorry. Like, if you couldn't tell, I really like ceratopsians.
Ceratopsians are fascinating.
Avatar of it, right?
Thanks, guys, for letting us geek out about that for a bit.
I love it. I love it.
Nothing wrong there.
Anyway, Jason.
So we got kind of our setting for Alaska. We understand roughly what the Printz Creek covers. It's probably good to mention also the kind of depositional environment it was. Mm-hmm. So for the most part, the Printz Creek is what's considered a fluvial coastal system. So there's a lot of water running down to the coast, but it's weird. It's not a typical depositional environment that you can see with the Hell Creek. It's more of a snapshot in catastrophes. So everything that we get from the Printz Creek Formation is stuff that has been washed down there. So it's a bunch of animals that have been routinely caught in these catastrophic floods, which is a large part why we get crappy material. And we get, like, these random bone beds that just pop up because it's just animals that were in the wrong place at the wrong time. According to Fiorillo and his work, he suspects that this was probably a seasonal flooding that was happening, and so it was things that were potentially snow melt from up really high that was just coming in, or just heavy monsoon seasons that are coming in, and they're just sending all this water down into the coast and just snatching up whatever animals it gets in the process. Which is why we have a very unique preservation for all the dinosaurs that we're getting down there.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, that makes sense, I guess. So
we're at it. While we're at it, let me just point out here that I'll know that there's quite the perception that because this is Alaska, it was frozen tundra, even back then. But you look at little details like this, like the depositional environment, that's supporting the idea that it had a much warmer sort of a climate. You can't make this sort of thing up. When you get a lot of little details like this kind of combining into one conclusion, that's a pretty darn strong case.
For it being warmer? Is that what I heard right?
For it being warmer, yeah. Like we're getting evidence of seasonal monsoons, which doesn't necessarily mean, oh, this is subtropical or anything like that. But you mentioned that, and I keep my inner paleo nerd Facebook is all like, but that was because of all the avalanches that were happening at the time. It's going to make an entirely different pattern in the rocks, right? Like, this isn't glaciers, this isn't avalanches, this isn't, the movement of snow. This is rain.
Lots of rain.
Or
Lots of rain. It could be from melting snow. So they do that up there. Sorry,
stuff up in the mountains that would be melting. The thing is that you're getting lots and lots of movement of water. And that's doing something very different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not solid water, just standard liquid water.
Right.
Which is funny, but solid water is glacier, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
And while we're talking about the climate, whoever wants to take up and address the misconception about how frequently modern paleo artists wrongfully depict the, environment of Printz Creek in particular, I'm going to zoom in on this illustration done by none other than the greatest of the present time, I dare say, paleo artist Andrey Atuchin, my favorite personally. And
he does really good work.
Very talented.
And he's very good. And I'm gonna zoom that in a little bit. So while you guys talk about the climate,
this brings us down to so associated with that seasonal flooding, that takes us to roughly what the mean annual temperature would be. So mean annual temperature, admittedly, is not the best measure because you could have a very cold month or a very hot month, and that's going to skew your average. But in general, the mean annual temperature that was expected for Printz Creek Formation was around 6 to 7 degrees Celsius, which is 6 to 7 degrees above freezing, which is a good sign. For comparison, if you think of modern-day Washington, it has a mean annual temperature about 10.9 or about 11 degrees Celsius. And then nearby Calgary, Alberta, has that mean annual temperature of 4 degrees Celsius. So it would be warmer than modern-day Alberta, despite being further north than modern-day Alberta. And then a little bit colder than modern-day Seattle, which, having lived in that region before, I can say pretty much you rarely get freezes and you rarely get snow. It's just rainy in the winter.
Here I see that from the same paper I mentioned earlier, the taphonomic and sedimentology interpretations of the dinosaurs bearing upper Cretaceous strata of Printz Creek, yada yada. That one claims that, or it states here that these bone beds formed under unique conditions, although mean annual temperatures on the coastal plains were high, roughly 5 degrees Celsius during the deposition of the Printz Creek Formation. So yeah, we're not like below freezing, from what I can tell here.
Right. So that means, and for what we see with the flooding, with the flora that are found there, everything suggests it was what we call a boreal rainforest, so just a very northern rainforest. So it would have been, there'd be swampy stuff, there'd be very subtropical temperate plants in there. And then there would still probably have been snow, but it would not have been a lot, and it probably wouldn't have lasted for very long.
Yeah.
Funny thing is that a lot of talk about climate is generally oversimplified. You got to keep in mind that paleontologists have to deal not only with all of the factors in climate that modern climate scientists have to deal with, but we also have to factor that in over geologic time. And if we're having to deal with kind of simplified folklore or narrative perceptions of what climate is, and that causes all sorts of problems. Take, for example, South Africa. Because it's in Africa, everybody tends to think, oh, yeah, that's a hot place.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of the narrative. But it gets below freezing in the southern end of South Africa, and you have elephants living out there, and they do just fine without having... Yeah, you know, that's not the sort of thing that you usually see pictured for Africa, and yet those animals, they deal with that at least a few days out of the year. Alaska back then might have been like that for, you know, a few centuries. We can't deal, or we can't measure that kind of resolution. Where I'm sitting right now, 12,000 years ago, would have been underwater and fed by glaciers. And now it's an oasis in the desert, literally. So all of that happened within 12,000 years, and that, you know, has nothing to do with the Industrial Revolution or anything like that. Geologically speaking, that is a flash in the pan. And so, you know, talking about, like, to put Jay's statement into perspective, that's one reason why using mean annual temperature is kind of a problematic sort of a thing.
Yeah.
It is warmer. It could have gotten colder. It could have gotten colder for centuries or even thousands of years, and we wouldn't be able to know that. Considering there's enough information to create a pattern that we can measure over millions of years, and that's kind of the stronger way of looking at it. And if you want to depict that, you got to find some sort of way of saying, okay, yeah, you've got snowy times in Alaska. Yeah, that probably would have happened. It's a picture of Nanosaurus, I'm assuming, in a snowfield. That could have happened.
Yeah.
With the information that we have now. Was that the norm? Very most likely, probably not. And where are the trees in this? They probably would have been there. We're talking about like one of those couple of centuries things.
Oh, what did you say about Nanosaurus?
The important thing with that image is that Nanosaurus can go and warm up next to that conveniently placed volcano.
Yeah, exactly. But that's also a good thing about dinosaurs, at least, you know, for the most part. They're big animals, so they generate a lot of body heat. So they're probably going to be able to withstand somewhat colder temperatures than smaller animals.
Yes, they'll have thermal lag that will reduce the time for them to cool down, which definitely comes in handy, so you can have a cold night and not really be that affected by it.
Exactly.
The bit that Jeffrey mentioned is important, is this concept of time averaging, where you just have all these years. So even though in this case, we're doing that mean annual temperature, it's not really annual, because by the time we're in late Cretaceous, we would have a resolution in the bone beds of maybe around 200,000 years. Like, that's a lot of time to pass. It's really hard to get higher resolution than that when you go that far back.
Right.
So we're compressing a lot of variation into...
Oh no, I got put in charge.
Thin line.
Oh man. I don't even know what to do. Yeah, sorry, continue.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so exactly how we're getting that temperature gradient remains unknown. One of the things that Fiorello brings up in the book, which I thought was really interesting, is that Alaskan or polar climate in the Mesozoic doesn't really have any equivalent today, and it's really hard to model it.
Yeah,
because it's so different. So there's been a lot of talk about these circumpolar gyres or subpolar gyres, basically just spinning vortices of air that would maybe they're pulling heat up from the south and bringing it into the north. Maybe there was constant cloud cover because of all the rain, and that was acting as way to reduce the amount of heat that can escape. Another one that comes up is that since we know that there was evidence for extensive foliage up north at the time, that would change the albedo. So the amount of reflection that would come off of the polar regions. So again, that would help absorb more heat. And of course, we have basically a constant connection across the ocean from the Western Interior Seaway all the way through into Asia. So there's plenty of water to help buffer against all that cold, any potential cold.
You got
very much an area that's up in the air for figuring out how that climate works.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got that in interior seaway, and it's got its own currents. And then once it dries out, and that's a dynamic variable in this system, then you've got, is there any lag between that and the wind currents? Did it have its own version of El Nino that just kind of kept going longer than you would have, or how was the drying interior seaway affecting that? It's a ton of variables to juggle.
Yeah, those are really interesting points to consider. Also, what I was wondering is, do we have any evidence that during the winter months that Prince Creek would go into some periods of darkness?
So that's one thing that we can be a lot more confident about. Because even though climate changes over time and behaviors and animals change over time, on a planetary scale, that stuff goes a lot slower.
Mm-hmm.
So there would have been about 6 months darkness, 6 months light, similar to what we get now.
So there would be, like, as that paper that I mentioned earlier stated, there would be some minimal freezing during these times?
There's the potential for minimal freezing during this time, potential snow during that time. I think the biggest issue that dinosaurs would probably be facing back then would be constant darkness, which is going to shut down all photosynthesis. So that means normal foliage production has dropped for 6 months out of the year. So it could be a situation where you are gorging yourself in the summer months and then just fasting for the winter months, or you're switching from high energy content in the summer months to much lower energy content in the winter months.
That seems to be the case when we look at the hadrosaurs. They're in their bone structure, I think. We see that they will grow a lot slower during some parts of the year, if I recall correctly.
Yes, it is a paper by Anusha Chinsami and company.
I posted it earlier, I think.
There's a living genus that kind of plays into that too. You guys have heard of Metasequoia, right?
Nope.
Okay.
Metasequoia?
Metasequoia. It's Oregon's state fossil, if I remember correctly. Now, we don't actually find fossil Metasequoia going back this far. We find something similar enough to it, and I can't remember its actual generic name, but we find something similar enough to it that it can be mistaken for Metasequoia. And so there are probably a lot of similarities between that, and it might have given rise to Metasequoia, evolutionarily speaking. So with that in mind, one of the interesting things about Metasequoia is that it is a gymnosperm, technically evergreen. Thing is that it loses its foliage in the fall. And papers that I've read about it suggest that this isn't due to cold, but
it's due to what? You cut out. I couldn't hear.
Okay, sorry. We don't think that it's losing its foliage because of the cold. I think what's happening is that the sequoia itself, which can't survive much farther north than British Columbia nowadays, something like it was living in Alaska during the Maastrichtian. we think that it got that habit of losing its foliage because of the excessive darkness during the poles. And then as you get climate changes driving it farther south, it retained that ability or that habit, but it didn't necessarily need it any longer. That's the idea. And that's yet another line of evidence that's supporting that, hey, we're talking about a climate that is not all that different from something like British Columbia or, the Pacific Northwest generally. Maybe it was a little colder, maybe you would see some snow, but it's more like that region now and for other times.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's nice. It's nice to know. So one more thing I was also... Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, good. Yeah, it's just, the Chinsame paper, where they basically, they found that alternating cycles of growth in the polar dinosaurs. So,
Yeah. I think I posted it. If I haven't posted it, do you have it by any chance?
I do have it. The title is Hadrosaurs were perennial polar residents.
Okay, I posted the... was it Polar Parade or something along those lines?
Yes, so Polar Parade is the other one. So we might as well go into that too while we're on topic on it. So one of the questions that came up in the late 70s, early 80s with the discovery of polar dinosaurs was, how the heck are they living up there when it's so damn cold?
Yeah.
So a very famous paper by Nicholas Houghton III came out where he suggested that in order to keep from cooling down, these dinosaurs would have just migrated in the winter months to more southern localities.
Yeah.
I call them the happy wanderers.
All right.
In paper. And the concept of migrating dinosaurs remained constant and received a lot of good reviews in general, and was thought that, that's probably what these polar dinosaurs were doing. There is a very famous, it was from a PBS special, Nova special on dinosaurs way back when, I think in the early mid 90s, where they showed herds of Edmontosaurus and Peki Rhinosaurus doing this migration. Then around, was it 2008?
2008,
and Eric Snively, they sort of did a review of migration in polar dinosaurs, and they looked at it biomechanically, and they looked at the overland migration costs, and they also looked at how long it would have to be. So to get from very far in the north inside the Arctic Circle, which is where Alaska was, to get down to a spot where the sun would still appear for 6 months out of the year, would have been about a 6,000 kilometer, 6,600 kilometer trek, which would make it the longest migration of any terrestrial animal. Biomechanically, dinosaurs just do not seem to be built for these kinds of large overland migrations. More and more evidence has been coming out over the past decade or so to make it seem, which makes it seem like, in terms of distribution, dinosaurs did not distribute very far. So there was a lot more endemism. So each group sort of lived within a more limited space, and then species would sort of diverse and distribute from there. But there's not really, potentially with exceptions for Triceratops and Tyrannosaurus, which are definitely the outliers there. For the most part, I guess it's Monosaurus now, dinosaurs would live in sort of smaller chunks of space, and then they would just distribute out from there. So that led to the whole idea that maybe dinosaurs in the poles were not migrating because of just how crazy long it would be. And now with the evidence from Anusha's work showing that Edmontosaurus just changed its growth style, which suggests that it was eating different food in the fall or the cold months.
It seems that Peki Rhinosaurus did this as well. I just linked the paper.
Rhinosaurus did the same. And then the kind of the real, I don't want to say nail in the coffin, but I'm going to say nail in the coffin. Putting that nail in the coffin for migrating dinosaurs is the fact that we now have evidence of hatchlings and eggs in the poles. And even if you think an adult Edmontosaurus might have it in it to cross 6,000 kilometers in 6 months or whatnot, good luck getting a baby to do that.
Yeah. I see a lot of dead babies.
I mean, that probably would happen anyway, but yes.
Yeah.
And that's actually kind of what I think really also kills this whole concept of the freezing polar Mesozoic.
Yeah.
Is that we have eggs, we have babies. We can certainly, like, there's no shortage of time where people can just sort of argue over the metabolic status of dinosaurs, whether they produced a lot of heat or if they just sort of relied on more of a passive way of doing it. But one thing that we can't really argue is that eggs are ectothermic. All eggs are ectothermic. Even a human fetus is ectothermic. It's just there is a level where producing heat is just it's so wasteful compared to just putting that into growth. So we know that large dinosaurs did not sit on their eggs for various very obvious biology. We even know that medium-sized dinosaurs such as the Troodontids and Oviraptorosaurs probably weren't sitting on their eggs either, but were sort of sitting around them, which is the more recent discoveries. So we're looking at burial, and we're looking at using rotting vegetation as the means for keeping the eggs warm. And if you only have 6 months of light to do that, then the rest of the time it can't be that cold, or the eggs must be doing something unique where they could actually postpone development for half the year, a process called embryonic diapause, which we do see in a couple of animals today, where basically they'll lay their eggs during a good time of the year and grow, or during a bad time of the year, and the eggs will just sit with nothing happening. And then the good time of the year, they'll start ramping up growth, and then the eggs will hatch before the bad time of the year shows up again.
Right. That's an interesting
it's very
point,
possible that we might see this in our polar dinosaurs because Greg Erickson and colleagues just 3 years ago, they came out with a paper where they looked at the calcium deposition inside the eggs of dinosaurs and were able to use that as a proxy for how long eggs took to hatch. So they looked at Protoceratops, they looked at Hypacrosaurus, Hypacrosaurus stebingeri, and what they found was Protoceratops took roughly 3 months to hatch, and Hypacrosaurus took closer to 6 months to hatch. Now, Hypacrosaurus is particularly interesting because Hypacrosaurus is a hadrosaur.
Yeah.
So it is much closer to Edmontosaurus. It's found in the Horseshoe Canyon Formation, which is South Alberta. So it's not as far north as in Alaska in the Paleo times, but it still would have been pushing its way towards the poles. So we get an idea that Edmontosaurus probably would have had a similar, or a polar Edmontosaurus probably would have had a similar incubation time, which means that you're either laying those eggs when it's dark or when it's light, and then the eggs are either going to hatch when it's dark or when it's light, or you're going to lay the eggs when it's dark, and the eggs aren't going to start doing anything until the light shows up again.
Yeah.
So there's a whole very interesting story about how polar dinosaurs were laying eggs and how long it took for them to reach reach hatching status. And that's a study that no one's undertaken yet. There's also the potential that has not been talked about too much, in large part because of the unique or the way in which dinosaurs calcify their eggs. But there is always a chance that polar dinosaurs could have also, some of them, done a type of what's called lacithotropic viviparity, where they basically hold onto the eggs inside them. So kind of hold the eggs in them and act as a incubator in the body for a little bit and then lay the eggs and let them finish the rest of their development after that. So take them during some part in the colder months or the darker months and then lay them. Again, this is all, who the heck knows? It's very much early studies on that. But yes, we do have a problem with there being hatchlings and eggs in a time period where there's 6 months of darkness. So 6 months of darkness and you have hatchlings. It's probably not 6 months of really cold darkness.
Yeah, and yet they were up there.
Yeah.
How life found a way, right?
Sorry, say it again.
It's the Ian Malcolm's, you know.
Oh yeah, life found a way.
Yeah.
Finds a way.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just missing a leather jacket and shades. And obvious part, and the hair as well.
So, what do you think of applying the caribou migration model for the Arctic hadrosaurs?
I mean, the caribou migration model was the one. So I think, and you posted a paper on that.
Yeah.
And, I think Pirillo was on that one as well.
I posted it a bit earlier.
Where is it?
Oh, I'll get it.
I might have lost it again. But yeah, so that was... So caribou were the poster children for overland migration of polar resident animals. The problem with caribou is the problem with all artiodactyls is that artiodactyls are outliers. They are not normal mammals. They have a unique build to them that is very energy efficient for things like long distance travel or even for endurance running. And dinosaurs are just not built that way. Again, as mentioned, the dinosaur migration, if they did it, would have been longer than what we get with caribou, which I think is 5,000 kilometers. And then the other discovery was that caribou don't just go north-south, but they kind of do more of a meandering migration. So it's an interesting idea, but at this point, the chances of these gigantic migrations in dinosaurs seems pretty unlikely.
I'll post a image that kind of covers the caribou model.
There it is, yes.
Yeah. One thing that's kind of interesting, and I'm not sure how much info we have on this, and we haven't really touched upon it at all. Wasn't there evidence of a therizinosaur footprint up in Alaska? Or am I mistaken?
No, I think that might be right.
Is that also more evidence in support of dinosaurs crossing Beringia?
Very likely. Come on, there it goes. Yeah. Let's see. So this is from Denali National Park, the Lower Cantwell Formation down there. Denali's been interesting because we keep getting evidence of behavior in Denali, mostly footprints. Less so with actual fossils. So yeah, there's been quite a lot of therizinosaur tracks that were found down there, which does suggest, yeah, that there's still that connection with Asia. And trying to see if I got any good images to go with that. Not so much. But while we're on that subject, it is worth mentioning. So one thing that comes up a lot is, so we've been focusing very dinosaur heavy, which makes sense.
Yeah.
The book that I've been sort of cribbing a lot of notes from has been Anthony Fiorillo's book, which is on Alaskan dinosaurs. So again, very dinosaur focused. But there were, of course, other vertebrates found there. Kind of the implication for dinosaurs in the poles was a metabolic one, that, okay, so they had to have been able to stay warm because it's so cold up there in the Arctic. And then the concept that in the Prince Creek Formation, you only find dinosaurs, but you don't find other reptiles. If we look at the older Nanoshook Formation, that's like right next to it or right below it, we do find there has been there's a turtle fossil or turtle mold that was found, as well as a clam that had a bite mark in it from either a crocodile or a campsosaurus. So we know that those reptiles were able to make it at least that far up into the Campanian. The Axel Heiberg stuff, there's a lot more reptile stuff up there as well, but again, it's slightly older. So a question that comes up is, why are we only finding dinosaurs in the Printz Creek? And for that, I think it's important to keep in mind that weird depositional setting where we're just getting what amounts to flash floods, just grabbing stuff and dragging it down.
Yeah.
So it's going to cause a size bias in what we get. And that's what gets us to other critters, right? So there's that. So we mentioned the turtle in that. But if we want to look at known endotherms, he says in big air quotes, mammals are found in the late Cretaceous, but they're only found in a single site, a single point along the Colville River. So there's just one little spot that's called Pediomes Point, or Pediomes Point, which is named after these lovely name, Pediominids, which were a group of multiberculates, which type of marsupials. They were very successful, found all throughout North America, but the polar fauna were about one quarter the size of their southern cousins. And almost all the fossils are from isolated teeth. So no real body fossils, just teeth. If you look at
surprise.
There are no evidence for birds in the Printz Creek Formation, but there are footprints of birds in the Cantwell Formation at Denali. So we know that birds existed in the late Cretaceous because there were footprints, but no body fossils. Similarly, we know that pterosaurs were up there as well, again, because we have footprints, or in this case, manus prints, because for some reason they were doing handstands. But that's it. So birds, pterosaurs, and mammals, if we just do birds and mammals, the two sort of givens for endotherms, we have almost no evidence for them. Just the fact that we have some really hard teeth found in one specific location, and then we have a couple of footprints. So if you think birds have very hollow bones, they fall apart very easily. Pterosaurs, the same deal.
Yeah.
Small-bodied mammals are going to have small bones that also tend not to get preserved. If you look at the majority of lizards and snakes, they're going to be relatively small animals, so that's going to knock out a lot of the potential for their preservation. And their teeth are not going to be as hard as mammals, so it's very likely for them to also not get preserved as well. So the fact that we've been studying the late Cretaceous in the Arctic region for decades now, and we only have 2 locations with evidence for some birds and some mammals, probably means that we will eventually come across a location that's going to get us a couple lizards or a couple snakes or a couple crocodiles or turtles. Definitely more turtles, because turtles just don't care.
Just even chilling in Printz Creek.
Yes. And then Printz Creek is probably going to always be kind of a crapshoot, just because the way it grabs stuff. There's always a chance that something is misconstrued, or maybe we'll get lucky and a troodon or a troodontid ate some lizard and then got buried in a flash flood and took that lizard with it before it had a chance to fully digest it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's important to keep in mind that these polar fauna, we're getting a biased and weird snapshot of what that fauna looks like.
Unfortunately,
dinosaurs are the most common that you're finding up there, and that's just because they're the ones that are most likely to get run over by a flood. And have enough body parts left over to preserve.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. Just a shame the preservation bias is still so sucky up there.
Yeah, and it's a hard area to study, because you really are
true.
limited to the summer times for any prospecting. And even then you're digging through permafrost, or you're going through chunks of ice to get down to where you need to go.
Yeah.
And you're relying a lot on what gets eroded out from the previous winter.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and then, Sorry, go ahead.
No, go continue. I'll let you finish.
Yeah, I'm just one last thing I was going to add is just that if we look at modern ectotherms, we do have the viviparous lizard, Zoetica vivipara, and then the European adder, Vipera berus, both of which live well within the Arctic Circle in temperatures that get down to colder temperatures than what any of the dinosaurs were experiencing, at least based on our mean annual temperature estimates. So these are areas that if modern day animals are doing it, it's not a guarantee that the previous ones in the past are doing it, but if it's not going to stop the animals that are living in a colder world today, it probably wasn't stopping them in the past either.
Yeah. Well, I think that's very interesting to note for these animals.
Yeah, it's very the Paleo-Arctic is very dinosaur dominated.
Yeah.
Because of preservation bias.
If only we got more complete dinosaurs. And I do really wish we get some more material that belongs to Nanosaurus. And obviously, because of my bias towards Ceratopsians, some more Peki Rhinosaurus.
Yes, it would be nice to get some more Nanosaurus stuff. There was some talk at some point last year about there being new material.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but then I can't remember, and Arson can add to that. It was what's his name's Facebook who did the mural, but he did a lot of teasing, and that's pretty much all that ever came from it. Was just teasing.
Dang.
What was that about? You have to remind me who was doing the mural and stuff. How long ago was it, and the context, because I can't remember what that's about.
The page was the Alaska Paleo Project. If that rings a bell.
Yeah, that does ring a bell for me.
Wait, was it not? I think I got it. It's James somebody, I think, right? He was the artist who did the sculpture of Nanosaurus, right?
Yeah, where he was drawing it, and then at the very end he put some main on it.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything in terms of any development on that since last time we probably brought it up, which was ages ago, and I have not heard anything in regards to any new specimens being discovered of Nanosaurus either. And I, as somebody who is a carnivore guy, I would love it if there were some, because based on what we have, it's really not much. It's just a couple pieces, and I just love it how much we have a lot of people out there already posting, just generally, in the community, I'm talking, posting a lot of different reconstructions of this and that, and coming up with different conclusions, and all you got is just a couple pieces. And even then, I'm struggling to understand how are they able to diagnose them with just these little small pieces. I just don't understand. Maybe there's something that I'm not seeing, but I am struggling to understand that. Why? How is it possible to even diagnose it properly, other than just saying, okay, so based on a time period and maybe a few things, like few shapes of, I don't know if there were already teeth maybe found as well along with it, I'm not sure, but let's say if there were some, then you might be able to use dentary. But anyway, Jason, what is your opinion on in terms of how easy it is to make some rather bad mistakes potentially in predicting what the animal may have looked like based on such a small fragment?
I think. I think my statements on these are always just, unless the material is very diagnostic, you're mostly making it all up.
Yeah.
Even looking at the Nanosaurus material, the evidence for the face being quite as shrunk as that, I'm not sure how strong that really is, because we really just have a chunk of maxilla, a random looking chunk of maxilla. So it's not a lot to go on. And then, of course, once you get to things like integument, you're pretty much making it all up at that point anyway. But
yeah,
there's always, if you want to get good traction on your paper in news outlets. You need to have a nice, striking piece of art, and paleo artists need to do what they can to make the most of what is often crappy little pieces. So it's something I can understand from the other end too, that there's going to have to be liberties taken.
Yeah.
I like the idea of the artist interpretation next to a skeletal showing how much is actually preserved. So at least it makes it very clear on the outset that this is how much we know and this is how much we're extrapolating. For that, I think it's fine.
Yeah, I agree because Nanosaurus is quite fragmentary, unfortunately. And I would also like a lot more of it, even though I am just a herbivore guy, but I would like, something like a big, large apex predator of this formation to be to have a more clear image, I suppose.
Yes, that we are pretty confident on the relative size compared to other Tyrannosaurs. I think tells an interesting story that it's not a very big Tyrannosaurid. So that is interesting. In fact, they all kind of fall in line with the Troodontids and potentially Dromaeosaurs. That there's just kind of a spot where things are not going to get as big. So it's interesting to see that there is what seems like a stunting of growth as you get a little higher up, at least with those guys.
We
see it with the dinosaurs, we'll see.
Yeah.
But Peki Rhinosaurs don't seem to show that.
Well, yeah.
Opposite.
Oh, that does kind of bring me to my next question or point I would want to make. But how it seems, at least from what I have read in the past, that Troodon seems to have gotten bigger. And Peki Rhinosaurus, I'm not entirely sure. I know Canadensis was a lot bigger than both Porotorum and Lacustai. But it was also a lot older than them. So, it's a lot older than Porotorum, I mean. So there was some shrinkage going on, but then again, I'm not sure if we have enough material from Porotorum to really tell how big it was. So why is it that while some may have shrunk, Troodon or a Troodontid that we find in Prince Creek may have grown in size?
Yeah, it's tough to explain exactly what is driving body size evolution in different animals. And for a long time, there's a rule in biology called Bergmann's rule, which just mentions that the closer you get towards the poles, the larger animals get. And as all biological rules go, it's about as useful as any of the others, in that it's more like a rule of thumb, more of a guideline.
Yeah.
Lots of things break the rule. So it's not particularly useful, right? It doesn't work in wolves. And then it does work. It works for some birds.
Seems to work for moose as well.
Yeah, works with moose. And
You may want to look into potentially
bears actually is the opposite.
Yeah, bear.
Sorry.
Well, what were you saying?
I just wanted to say that you may want to look into the idea that whatever the biggest specimen of Paratorum that was found, maybe see whether or not the specimen was fully grown already, whether it was fully the adult, or if it was a sub-adult or still a young adult but not fully grown yet.
What we do have for Paratorum, luckily, is we have quite a bit of evidence regarding ontogeny for Paratorum, and the largest specimens that we have of Paratorum are still a bit fragmentary, especially in the frill area. You get nice nasal bosses and all that, but they just really don't compare to the size of the massive drumheller specimen from Pachyrhinosaurus canadensis. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, or suspected earlier, is that it might just be, unfortunately, just bad luck that we just do not have a lot of material from Peki Rhinosaurus peritorum to make a conclusive argument. But from what we can see, from the evidence we currently do have, is that Canadensis does seem to be a bit larger than peritorum.
It gives me food for thought that because peritorum, based on what I'm seeing, it's either slightly smaller than Lacustae, or it would even be, if you take into account the potential issues of proportional, reconstructions and adjustments of ceratopsids in general, they would be about the same size, at least according to many people. Some people say Peritorum was the smaller species. Other people claim that they are roughly the same size as Lacustae, maybe if you take into account individual variations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
You don't have a small, you don't have a good enough sample for Peritorum as you have with Lacustae. But but there is one other thing that I think that we do not consider, we have not outlined yet, is the fact that Canadensis, even for a Centrosaurin, based on what we know, is a bit of an outlier in size.
Yeah, except for Sinoceratops, they seem to be.
Sinoceratops is a bit in between. It's kind of getting close there, but at least I don't know how reliable the estimates are based on the specimen, because I don't know how complete it is. It's only like how many specimens? One specimen probably.
Yeah, we have one or two specimens, one decently sized skull and a few parietal pieces, which does put it within the same range as large Pekirhinosaurus canadensis specimens.
It may be that case, yeah, or it would be a little bit smaller, so it makes it then at the smallest conservative, let's just say, approach would be that it would be somewhere in between the standard Centrosaurin size, which is about 5 to 6 meters in length.
Yeah.
And then you have the larger one, like Pekirhinosaurus canadensis, which is about 7 to 8, 7 being obviously the more conservative estimate. And then you take into account the sample size and the availability of the rest of the material. Portions as well are always tricky with ceratopsids. They always jump around a lot, so you're gonna have a little tough time. It's a bit of a guesswork, and but based on that, even if you have, let's just assume that Sinoceratops was equal in size approximately to Canadensis. Two of them basically out of all of the other ones that we know from these Centrosaurins overall seem to be the outliers. Everything else goes either about 5 to 6, or even sometimes goes about 4 to 4.5. Sort of different steps of size in that way. So yeah, wanted to geek out a little bit on the size issue, but there we go.
Yeah, so. post Cranius sucks. It's Ceratopsians.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
It really sucks.
At that point.
Yeah, but they don't really differ that much either. So, but we don't know until we, find more evidence. So yeah, this all in all, we maybe could find a very large Peritorum somewhere hidden in Alaska, because I've heard people claiming, there's no evidence to back it up, of course, at least that I know of, that Peritorum could have been as big as Canadensis. But then, as Arsen mentioned earlier, there's a lot of evidence that suggests that they were more close in size to Lacustae.
Well, based on what we've seen, at least, because even if you go back to your diagrams, the skulls are generally very similar with Lacustae. If you restore them to their full, form and shape, you would pretty much see the same thing.
Exactly.
Even if one of the skulls is a little shorter in some areas, that does not mean that the body itself would have been different. It just means that one might have slightly proportionally shorter skull, but may have been wider there, or may have had a bigger bump. It's kind of a balance of mass issue, and that is if there is an issue. So there is that too.
Yeah. So not to stray too far from the topic. I guess that Peritorum, if it did get smaller, it may have been due to the lack of resources in Printz Creek. So, yeah, because we know Regalis is at the most smaller than Anectens as well.
Yeah, Regalis, generally, I think they are considered Well, I would say this: Regalis and Anectons, you would probably be okay saying that on average they would be about the same.
Yeah,
Until
on
you
average
start
they'd be
considering,
about the same.
hold on a second. Until you start considering the outliers from the species.
Mhm.
Now, the problem with outliers is that they don't represent the general sort of population. And you know how sometimes if you look at the crocodilian populations, even today, sometimes you have Nile crocodiles that go out in sizes quite badly, badly as in like significantly in comparison.
Mhm.
So that means that we are going to have generally average population would be a certain size, but then you have one that just goes really big.
Yeah.
And we know, for example, there is Admentosaurus and Ectins that go as far as almost like
15 meters.
yeah, like Shantungosaurus size,
Yeah.
basically. But
10 tons about.
yeah, exactly, yeah. But the problem is how many of them, in comparison to what we have found in general in terms of the age for the adults, are actually out there. And in order to be
Yeah.
able to reliably say that this is the representative or on average of what this taxon, well, this species would have been.
I do have a chart for that, for the larger Montosaurus and Necton specimens. I'm just gonna try and find it.
Yeah, feel free to drop it in. And but anyway, let's Jason to comment on what we just said in terms of the size issue, especially regarding to. Well, we could potentially apply the same idea to the Regalis as well, because it seems like the Admontosaurus regalis was part of that place too, or so we think. So.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts, Jason, on terms of the potential maximum capacity when it comes to the size, and whether or not Paratorum may yet yield a larger size, or are we already looking more or less at about the same size as Lacostai, which is not going to be an outlier, it's just going to be the standard Centrosauran size?
I think resource limitation is going to largely be driving how big you're going to get. If we don't see too much of a size difference, between like Admontosaurus annectens and Admontosaurus regalis, then that's probably means that our polar residents are able to get enough food throughout the year to continue to increase that biomass.
Yeah.
It's possible that Admontosaurus was just a more generalist animal anyway, and was just able to switch its diet more quickly. I feel like there were isotopic studies or possibly some coprolite studies that looked at that in Admontosaurus, but don't hold me to that one. As for Peki Rhinosaurus, I don't follow the different species as well as you guys do, but judging by how often we get bone beds and just material from the animal, I'm thinking there's enough that we can probably say whether or not the sizes are an outlier versus just kind of the average for the group. And at this point, they're probably just going to be average.
Yeah, maybe one day we'll find some more Pachyrhinosaurus sporatorum specimens. Maybe even a bone bed, who knows? Would be nice.
Just got to find that right spot at the Printz Creek for crossing at the time, and that'll do it.
If only it just wasn't so hard to get to the fossils.
Well, it's a warming world, right? So every year it'll expose a little bit more. We'll have a bit of a lighter.
I see more positives in any case, if that's the case,
Yeah, and we've done this talk today just talking all about the Arctic stuff. There is, of course, the opposite side with the Antarctic. And a similar situation down there where it's unique deposition environment. We're really limited in where we can prospect because of how much is still covered in ice. But kind of a similar deal where everything down there would also have been experiencing about 6 months of light and 6 months of darkness. And then, in terms of foliage down there, it looks like it was also very much like a swampy, rainforesty area as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. We do have quite a few interesting animals from down there as well, if I recall. I think we even have. Correct me if I'm wrong, but do we have a sauropod from down there?
As of 2 or 3 years ago, yes, we now have sauropod material.
May
which
I
is
also
interesting
ask to verify the time period?
Clarify the time period?
Yeah, for the said sauropods, what was the time period, if there was any specifics?
I'm pretty certain it was Cretaceous, but let me find out.
I mean, we do know, of course, some early Jurassic stuff, like notable Cryolophosaurus from Hansen. I believe it was Hansen formation. And there were probably some other stuff that was cited, presumably of different other animal groups, but that's going as far as early Jurassic. I have absolutely no clue what's going on there in the late Cretaceous specifically, which is the other bit that's quite interesting to see how that kind of went down.
For some reason, it's a lot older because I can't grasp time anymore. 2012 was the first record of an Antarctic sauropod by Ignacio Cerda and Company. It was published in Naturwissenschaften. Oof.
You're better at names than I am.
Partial caudal vertebrae from a titanosaur, and it was late Cretaceous.
Oh, interesting.
All the way up till extinction, or late Cretaceous as in slightly prior to that, a little bit equivalent to what was
Upper Campanian, so it would have been a little bit older than our Maastrichtian guys.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, shall we also address some other things? You know how, because of the area, once again, everybody thinks that it was winter, you know, like frozen tundra or frozen hell from the Norse mythology, if you were to say that, in that area. But, Jason, do we know whether or not this is true or not? Because something tells me it's not true. Something tells me that it was a lot warmer, maybe something similar to how the Printz Creek was. But I wanted to know if you can tell us something about that, about the environment, and how it also, of course, naturally gives people excuses to influffen their dinosaur depictions, you know, that are based in that area. Because apparently that's how it's being dictated, which is not something I agree with. I have many problems with it, but I digress. So anyway, Jason, can you comment something on that?
Yeah, largely, again, the fact that the flora down there don't show signs of being like cold adapted, or what we would consider cold adapted animals. Again, evidence for glaciation is pretty limited. If there was even any kind of floating sea ice at the time, it was questionable. There are plesiosaur and plesiosaur and I think mosasaur material that suggests that, especially I think for the plesiosaurs, if I remember, that it was there was a potential nursery area, so sort of a shallowy water area where the young could be dropped off and grow, which is not something that you'd want to do if it's going to be really cold down there. And then, of course, recently, as in this past year, we had that discovery of a very large egg from Antarctica that is either mosasaurian or dinosaur, something like that. And which again means that there was nesting down there, and if there's nesting down there, then it can't have been too cold.
Yeah.
It's just going to be freezing your eggs solid.
Well, I guess that takes care of that.
Stuff's a little harder to pull together, because that's going to also include parts of Australia, which would have been attached to Antarctica at the time. There are,
because we don't have a whole lot of Australian paleontology from very late Cretaceous, do we? Or is there something that we do see aside from? I mean,
Australia is a problem because Australia has eroded so much, and then just kind of stayed in place, so it's hard to find good outcrops.
We do
But we
have
have
dinosaurs like the Barosaurus, for example, that go. I think they are in the 90 sort of million year range. I think, aren't they? So that's not quite as late Cretaceous. It's like middle late Cretaceous, isn't it, or something like that?
say it one more time.
The Barosaurus.
Oh yes, Barosaurus. That was Lake Cretaceous guy, but it wasn't in the Arctic region. It was just an Australian resident.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
so
don't
the
know all the localities of them, unfortunately.
relatively small early ankylosaur. So before Ankylosauridae and Nodosauridae were a thing, somewhere at the base. It's a weird critter.
Yeah. It's weird enough that I might actually consider making a model of it for the kids. Because why not? So,
Yeah.
is there any other questions and comments that we wanted to cover that you guys wanted to address as well before we start wrapping this whole thing with a little bow on top?
Not that I can think of at the moment. I think we've covered quite a bit.
Yeah, I feel like we covered a lot of stuff. Again, very Arctic focused, but
Yeah.
Antarctica was not much different in terms of what we're seeing with a unique polar climate, but not a freezing polar climate.
Yeah.
And of course, all the paperwork that we shared here in the chat, I'll try to make sure that I backtrack on it and include it all in the description box below for those who are going to be catching up and watching this video once it is up on the channel. So, if nobody else has anything to add, I'm just gonna wrap up this session and conclude it at this point. And you guys are certain, everybody cool, everybody happy with what's being laid out, no more questions.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say objections, but there's not really much brought up to object anyway, so...
I would hope not.
Right. Yeah, same here actually.
Say in the end.
That's right. All right, well, I want to thank Jason and Jeffrey whenever he sees the video, that is, for coming to this session as the guests, and also thanks for Ydnas for co-hosting, your first time co-hosting probably.
Yeah.
So I guess you did pretty well for the first timer, I suppose.
Oh,
so
thank you.
I am happy. I'm happy. I don't have any problems really. I think you're good. So
Thank you.
But other than that, oh wait, we got a question. Okay, Chris, post your question quickly, and then we're gonna wrap up because it's quite a bit of time now. We don't really have a whole lot. It's already a 2-hour video or something like that.
Oh, this is short for one with me in it.
I actually was expecting it was gonna be 1 hour and a half, but I think we are okay with 2 hours. So.
No, I've been really trying to contain myself with the Peki Rhinosaurus talk.
Next time what we're gonna do is, if we're gonna be doing a really long one, we can try to see what's the longest one that Moller has ever done and see if we can beat that, but I think that's gonna be a very tough one to do. Because he's got videos, if you look him up on YouTube, his name is Moller, and if you look up how long his sessions go, they are in the proximity of, I don't know, you can almost, like whole day basically, there are people going in and out for 10 hours. Maybe more than that. So,
jeez.
Yeah, good luck beating that, I suppose.
Yeah, if he was doing that for charity or something.
Who knows?
It's crazy.
It's all for the good things out there. I mean, they talk about stuff like just, entertainment, business, things like that, games. But anyway, let's go about the question. When will we be speaking about Creo and their environment? I thought we were connecting it with this one, so possibly part 2. Well, I mean, did we not already say that the environment was generally consistent, or is it different in terms of the Hansen and the early Jurassic? Jason, can you answer that one if that's all right?
Yeah, early Jurassic should have been, if anything, warmer, because it would have been, Antarctica should have been further from the North Pole at that point. Or further, well, Jesus Christ. Actually, at that point. Further from the South Pole. That's a good sign.
I get the poles confused all the time as well.
One goes up, one goes down. Yeah, because let's see, that was Cryolophosaurus found.
Hansen formation.
Hansen formation.
Yeah. It's probably one of the best known dinosaurs from that place anyway. I don't think there's a lot of other animals that are as well known from there.
Jurassic too, so that's that would have been pretty good. It would be great if I could get a shot of where Antarctica was in the early Jurassic. I wonder if we can do that.
I mean, Jurassic period in general was the warmer time anyway, on a global scale as well, wasn't it? As you said, it's kind of more tendency, I think, towards the change happened more towards Cretaceous, which I think partially characterizes the Cretaceous period as well.
Yeah, one weird thing about the Jurassic would be that you have more connected land masses, which means less space for water to go. So it can have the potential to dry up and be a lot cooler. It was one of the things we noticed with the Permian, with Pangea, was that once it's a large landmass, it was actually pretty cool, both climatically and I guess in general, but about as cool as today. So during Permian time, but because it was pretty far away from the pole back then. That one, a second part on Antarctic dinosaurs is not a bad idea. There's just less information available, so it would definitely be a short podcast.
I mean, if it's going to be a part 2, it's very likely going to be a shorter part as well, just because there's just really not a lot of info to cite, to actually make a meaningful discussion.
But it would be much the same. Since we're talking early Jurassic, from what I remember, it's mostly that sort of subtropical rainforesty environment. There would have been 6 months of darkness, or roughly 6 months. Might have been a little less because it was further away from the pole back then, but there still would be extensive amounts of time where they would be in the dark. Leileinosaurus is another one from down there, which is the one that has the giant eyes.
Yeah.
Leileinosaurus, that came a little bit later, I think, wasn't it? In the time.
That would be more Cretaceous type.
Cretaceous, yeah.
Glacialosaurus.
Yeah, like that, walking with dinosaurs. What was it? The Dwarfalosaur. That was quite a funny one, if you remember. Well, I mean, if there's nothing else, really, if everybody's happy with this for now, because as far as I can see, there's really not much to add. There's only so much, as I said. If you want to really get into the details and not just speculations, but actually try to narrow down the evidence or facts to the best possible, available material, it's really not a lot to go by. It's not like Hell Creek or Morrison or whatever. If you want to discuss something a bit more well known, it's a very.
I feel like those, are environments that you can do better.
Go on for hours about that one.
And it's less catastrophic, so it's easier to put together the environment for that area. These polar areas a little bit harder. I'd have to do more research on the Antarctic stuff to see how the preservation is in that, because I feel like it's not quite the same as what you get with the Prince Creek, where it's just like yearly floods. So it's a bit more stable. Plus, you get more Jurassic stuff, which is cool.
That's true, yeah. Jurassic stuff doesn't get coverage nearly as much as the Cretaceous, and I think we might be able to do something like that. And
and again, I think it's a large part. It's easier, believe it or not, to prospect in Alaska than to prospect in Antarctica.
Yeah.
So James Ross Island, Seymour Island, I think the two that mostly get, and they're all on the southern tip of Antarctica. So there's lots of stuff inland that would be very interesting to see that we just can't have access. We just can't get access to right now.
Is underwater digging a thing, by the way, for fossils? I've never heard of that personally. So do you know anything of that, Jason?
Underwater digging for you can do underwater prospecting. If I jump into if I jump outside of paleo for a bit, there's an entire field in archaeology called underwater archaeology.
Right.
So you can do that with paleontology. It was done actually recently. I think it was in Madagascar. There was a bunch of underwater digging for. It was I want to say it was like Pleistocene level material that they were digging out of a cave or out of some outcrop underwater, and they were pulling up some cool croc fossils. So you can do it. It's a lot harder, obviously, but it can be done.
Probably more expensive as well.
Yeah, there's Glacialosaurus put in the chat.
Yep.
So much to go on.
Well, this is what just these look like they are the limbs, right?
Yeah, before the
digits.
part of the feet by the looks of it.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Yeah, probably part of the feet.
So that was another early Jurassic or dinosaur.
Yeah, it's a sauropodomorph of some sort.
Yeah, or prosauropods type. One of those. Sauropodomorph. There we go.
Okay.
And of course we have kind of the full complement with no ceratopsians down there, but that makes sense because it's
Shame.
it's Gondwanan, right? So everything we talked about before is Laurasian stuff, Tyrannosaurs, ceratopsians, but then you go down to Gondwana stuff. We're looking at allosaurids, looking at great if we got stegosaurs, but nothing yet. But then we got sauropods and we have ankylosaurs down there.
I mean, generally speaking, even if you look at the late Cretaceous overall, even prior to extinction, based on what is known, it appears that in areas like North America and some certain parts of Eurasia, quite big parts probably of Eurasia, I would suggest, the top predators were tyrannosaurids. And if you look at areas like Madagascar, probably South America as well, and also in some parts of Europe, and well, you would say in Europe and Asia as well, like India, for example. Those, I think, were dominated mainly by abelisaurids. I don't think they had tyrannosaurids, unless, of course, abelisaurids were actually the middle tier, and there may yet be a bigger tyrannosaurid, which would be the apex, probably. But I just haven't heard of any being found there. Even
there's no
Romania as well. Romania is well interesting that we have Hatzegopteryx, which just dominates the whole island, basically as its own ecosystem, where everything is just small, and that's the only thing that's actually big there in terms of the dinosaur standards or just generally the animal standards of Mesozoic. Yeah, sorry, Jason, cut you off there. Didn't mean to.
Oh yeah, no, just it's one of the main dividing lines. Like you get tyrannosaurs up north, and you get allosaurs down south, sort of down south up north. Just because at that point you have two big supercontinents that are just split from each other. So unless tyrannosaurs are going to try to swim across, they're pretty much limited to the Europe, North America, Asia stuff, and then South America, Africa, Australia, Antarctica area. That's all going to be Carcharodontosaurus, which are all allosaurs, and then abelisaurs, which are like almost like ceratosaurs.
Well, abelisaurids go all the way to the end. You know, like Majungasaurus is one of the last abelisaurids, which is from Madagascar. Then you have, if you look at Carcharodontosaurids, just generally any allosauroid, I think they stop showing up on the record at about 93 or 92 million years ago. Something along those lines. I don't think they go beyond 90 as far as I remember.
It's what's the word I'm looking for? Can't spell with one thing.
Yeah, spelling is an issue for me as well. I started to spell with so many typos.
No, we should have allosaurs that go pretty much all towards the end. I mean, yeah, we've got companion, restricted area.
Okay.
Galvanator.
Restricted to specific places then.
I think it's important, to keep in mind that allosaurids are like the most successful of the theropods. Like they just show up in Jurassic they're going to just keep on going. And they tend to get overshadowed by Tyrannosaurs, but
Well, that's another interesting
people
thing
love
as well.
Tyrannosaurs. But let's Allosaurs in their group definitely deserve some respect because they just keep on going.
Yeah,
yeah,
we're gonna have to do something on them,
group.
like maybe do a coverage for them, because obviously we are kind of straying off topic a little bit. My fault, I guess, because I started kind of going there. But generally, what I mean is that it's a common misconception to assume that Tyrannosaurid would be your standard quote unquote theropod, but that's not really the case. The sort of more, I think, the sort of, common standard kind of classic look for the theropod is actually an Allosauroid, not the other ones, not the late Cretaceous Tyrannosaurids and stuff like that, but it's the just Jurassic and Cretaceous Allosauroids. Those are the standard. But anyway, I think that's a bit of a topic, but we can do that as well. That's a good topic to talk about, especially Allosauroids is one of my other favorite groups of carnivores, since I am a large carnivore guy. So, Jason, I hope you will be willing to come back for that one.
That could be interesting, yeah. The big takeaway, I think, is just that, by late Cretaceous, you had a distinct what's the word I'm looking for? Distinct distribution in dinosaurs, with sort of the northern dinosaurs and the southern dinosaurs. So a lot of convergence in paleoecology, just with different players, just because of who happens to be there at the time. So yeah, it is interesting. I think we had a question in the thing after Tyrannosaurus, which was a mosasaur that was one of the ones that was living up in Antarctica, and there was probably laying eggs or giving birth. Well, since it's a mosasaur, most likely giving live birth in what might have been a nursery area up there.
Yeah, this is another interesting thing, that when you look at things like nursery areas, these tend to be the indicators that it wasn't cold probably in these areas, since it's impossible to properly nurse the young when it's really cold. In at least the way I understand, since we are looking at reptiles, right? So I'm not sure if there are any reptiles that can nurse their young in cold climates, like really cold ones, winter sort of cold.
The concept of the nursery, we see it with sharks, right? Is that you're giving birth to the young in an area that's fairly secluded, that has a good amount of food for smaller animals to eat, and that is like away from predators. So kind of hard to do something like that in an area that's going to be frozen over, because the amount of food available to any developing young is going to be very small. And regardless of metabolism, like if you don't have the food to eat it, you're just stuck. So we see it with whales usually giving birth in warmer waters. The weird situations where we see animals that are giving birth to young during bad times of the year are either ones where the embryos are freezing, as in freezing development, for half the year or however long the bad part of the year is, or if they have ready access to food already, such as polar bears giving birth to young during the winter and then just nursing their young in the cave for however many months before they can finally come out and go hunting again. And that's just living off the fat reserves of the mom.
This is another interesting thing, by the way, I wanted to ask you. If there's been, in these areas like Arctics and Alaska as well, Prince Creek in particular too, if there were times when it was dark for a long time, and obviously, as you specify, that provides some kind of food shortage in that time period until the next time it becomes more available. Does that mean that they might have potentially needed to eat up so much so they could gain enough fat reserve so they could expand it during that time before the next food reserves become available?
Oh yeah, definitely possible. What we saw with the Monosaurus data was that it seems more either that they were living off fat reserves or they were switching to less nutritious material during that time, but they weren't fully stopping growth. So it was never cold enough or low enough energy, or there wasn't enough lack of food that they couldn't keep going. So that is interesting. We'll get more of that. I don't know if anyone's done any histology for our Antarctic guys. I think Cryolophosaurus might have got something.
Cryolophosaurus does get brought up quite frequently in general, probably just because of how interesting it looks alone, just in that. Although funny enough that I haven't seen anybody actually try to classify it just yet properly. You know, it hasn't really been assigned to any particular existing group, so maybe chances are it might eventually form up its own group. Who knows? Same weird thing, which is obviously not directly to the Antarctic, but it's a Chinese theropod from I think it's called Shishugo Formation, the Monolophosaurus as well. Both of them seem to be a bit like outliers, just free roaming, not belonging anywhere, just kind of like, you know, their own thing of sort, probably.
Yeah, that. And I guess it should, if we're talking, and this is definitely more of a Jeffrey area, but naming dinosaurs polar bear reptile or the frozen reptile, probably, or the frozen crested reptile, probably doesn't help if you're trying to expel the idea of a very cold, freeze, and frigid polar environment when you're naming things after freezing cold things. But yeah, follow that. Look more at Antarctic stuff would be interesting, especially because we have more. I feel like for the Antarctic stuff, we have a more interesting description of what's going on in the waters. So a lot of Plesiosaur stuff, a lot of Mosasaur stuff.
All right. Well, in this case, I suppose, does that mean we definitely covered everything at this point? Because I just don't see what else, to be honest. I really tried to think even in advance before I came
I think
here.
we covered a lot of it. I think I do feel bad because I feel like I did to Antarctica what everyone does to Gondwana, and you forget about it and then sort of pull out the remains.
That's fair.
Like South America, Africa, Australia, those are all areas that, especially South America and Africa, that are just like loaded with dinosaur fossils, and not enough people are studying them. So we have a very low resolution idea of what was going on in the Mesozoic during then, and it's gotten a lot better over the past 10 years, 20 years or so. But when you compare it to what we know about things in North America or Europe or Asia, it's easy to forget how diverse everything was down south, and if you're not careful, it can be one of those things where you can use everything that we know from all these northern animals and impart what's going on there to what's going on in the south, which we really shouldn't be doing. I mean, we should let the southern animals speak for themselves. So I'm always excited when I hear more stuff from South America or Africa, and then rarely when it comes out Australia and Antarctica, because that really is filling in a spot that we just don't know as much.
I would love to hear a lot more from these areas as well. Especially, I don't know why, but for some reason, something just tells me that there's just so much interesting that was going on throughout, especially the late Cretaceous in Africa as well. And
Oh, definitely.
because Africa generally has a tendency to have a very interesting ecosystem throughout its history of megafauna, and the tendency is to have large animals as well throughout its history in paleontology as well. That's really what's mind-blowing, because some of the largest Carcharodontosaurids were found, in fact, both in the South America and Africa. So we have things that potentially, no, I wouldn't say quite rivaled, but yeah, let's just call it for argument's sake. Let's say rivaled the T-Rex in dimensions wise, at least. Maybe not in mass as much, but in dimensions at least, and skull length and stuff like that. We could see that there are predators there that are really big, and we see there are lots of large sauropods. There are lots of other really big animals there. That the only thing I haven't seen, and I think nobody has yet seen, not that I know of anyway, is any ceratopsids from either Africa or from South America. Now that would be interesting to see if there have been any, but I don't think there were. I think they were mostly restricted to the Asia and especially North America, but who knows?
Yeah, they seem to be, just like Tyrannosaurs, they seem to be unique to the northern hemisphere, to Asia, North America area. So they came about, that both groups seem to have come about at a time when the two continents had already split far enough apart that it was hard for any interchange to take place. Which is probably why we see Tyrannosaurs and Carcharodontosaurs and Abelosaurs all kind of converging on the same ecological model, just with different animals in that spot.
Yeah, this is very interesting because in Africa, I believe they also, again, there are rumors. Nobody can really measure truly, I think, what the animal would have been like. There was a rumor of a footprint of a belisaurid that could go as far as 11 meters length, which rivals, some of the Tyrannosaurids, not early, sorry, you could say it's relatively early Tyrannosaurids like Albertosaurians and some of the other Tyrannosaurians as well, in terms of length at least, and potentially maybe even mass, depends on what the body plan was. But then again, they're just footprints, and that's a problem.
I wasn't worried about just footprints, but yes, I understand that. It's definitely signs that there was a large theropod that was probably an Abelosaur back then.
Unless we get a really interesting surprise, and it would just be, there would be fossils somehow associated with another footprint that would be equivalent to that, and then we see all of a sudden a Tyrannosaurid there pop out of nowhere, and that would be quite an interesting WTF, I would probably say.
Yeah, unfortunately, footprints aren't that reliable.
But
when it comes to estimating mass, I remember, say, Ceratopsian footprint or something that resembles Ceratopsian footprint that would have, if the estimates were actually correct and not distorted, the animal that made it would have been like massive. Like over double digits in mass. Just insane. But of course, that is quite unlikely. There's like even a Wikipedia page on it. Ceratopsis, Ceratopsis, something like that. Just Ceratopsian and Pis. That's foot.
Topsopus.
Yeah, something like that.
Topsopus. Yep. Yeah, I'm glad I don't study ichnofossils because it feels like you got to do a lot more forensic work to figure out what you can.
Yeah.
All right. So, are we happy with everything so far? Then shall we wrap up? And
sounds good to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say we covered it all. The Arctic was not quite as cold as everyone thinks it was back then, and neither was the Antarctic. And that we have a weird distribution of animals from there just because of how that depositional setting works. So
and the animals live there year round.
And they live there year round.
Also, Peki Rhinosaurus did not have wool.
Yeah, don't get me started on that.
Cryolophosaurus is very likely not been filamentous, although we don't know, but I suspect it was not. And
yes. It should be. Yeah, we should mention that we do have Centrosaurian and we have Centrosaurian integument up there. We have
and Castrosaurus
up there. So we're pretty confident that those were scaly animals, which again would seem to be a problem if you're going to be living in a really cold environment.
Although it doesn't seem to be a problem as far as we can tell, even though, as we said, it's not a tundra, but it's still not exactly the suntan kind of climate either.
Yeah. Either way,
Right.
like
If we are to compare the Seattle kind of model that Jason mentioned earlier on.
if we were to like go into filaments on Ceratopsians, we would be here another hour.
Yeah, that would be
Yeah.
just insane until tomorrow.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yes, we'll save that for another time.
Yeah.
Definitely, there's lots of content saved for future. So this list is growing actually. Once we knock out one thing of the list, it seems to that we have two things that take its place. It's like heads of the
Yeah.
Hydra, you chop off one and then it's the other two that come up again. So,
Yeah.
anyways,
Yeah.
yeah. Sorry, Ydnas, go ahead.
I just think this was a good talk. I had fun, and I learned a lot, and hopefully other people learned a lot from this talk.
Yeah, same here. I'm hoping that whoever's gonna be watching when the video comes out, it's gonna be good. And of course, it means you have to stack up on some supplies to see through it. But other than that, I think it's all good. It's kind of in the usual traditions of the channel, so I don't see anything particularly out of order here.
Yeah.
So, once again, Jay, thank you very much for joining us for our Paleo Talk series. And now it's time to wrap up the session. So, thank you all for coming. And if you're new to the channel, once again, make sure you hit the like button, smash the belly button, and hit that subscribe as well. If you can, hit that many times, but make sure that you're subscribed. Make sure you stay subscribed because YouTube does shenanigans. And also, just stay tuned for the next video and check out my Discord server as well if you want to directly interact with me or ask me any questions. And there are also artists here who promote their work. Some of their work is available for sale. That includes myself and a few other people. So make sure you get in touch if you're interested. And at this point, it's a wrap. And off we go. Ciao.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Later.